I traded a child's future for a new library wing and a state-of-the-art gymnasium. That is the simplest way to say it, though I've spent 30 years trying to find a more complicated version that makes me look like less of a coward. I was the principal of St. Jude's Prep in Michigan for nearly 3 decades. I have a ledger in my study, a heavy leather-bound thing, where I kept notes on every disciplinary hearing, every parent-teacher conflict, and every donation. People thought I was being thorough. They didn't realize I was keeping a record of my own debts. It was 1994. The winter was particularly brutal that year, the kind of cold that gets into the limestone of the school buildings and stays there until May. My office always smelled of damp wool and floor wax. I remember the morning Leo Miller was brought to my office. He was 15, small for his age, with skin so pale you could see the blue veins in his temples. He was shaking so hard his teeth were literally chattering, but it wasn't from the cold. His shirt was torn. His left eye was already swelling into a dark, angry purple. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the corner of my mahogany desk, his hands tucked under his armpits. "Leo," I said. My voice was soft. I like to think of myself as a fair man then. "Tell me what happened in the locker room." He didn't speak. He just shivered. 5 minutes later, Julian Vance walked in. Julian didn't knock. He didn't have to. His father, Marcus Vance, had just pledged $3 million for the school's expansion. Julian was 17, tall, athletic, and possessed an arrogance that was so natural it felt like a physical scent. He had a small scratch on his knuckle. That was it. "He started it, Mr. Thorne," Julian said, sitting down without being asked. He flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a politician's smile even back then. "Leo's been unstable. He came at me with a pair of scissors. I had to defend myself." I looked at Leo. The boy finally looked up, and the terror in his eyes was absolute. "I didn't," Leo whispered. He held me down. He and the others, they used the... He couldn't finish the sentence. He broke down, sobbing into his hands. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was the sound of something inside him snapping, a high-pitched, rhythmic keening that made the hair on my arms stand up. I knew Julian was lying. I had seen the reports of his pranks for years. I knew about the way he targeted the scholarship kids. I knew Leo Miller didn't have a violent bone in his body. But I also knew that the school's roof was leaking. I knew the teacher's pension fund was underfunded, and I knew that Marcus Vance was waiting for my call. I told Julian to go back to class. I waited until the door closed, and then I sat there in the silence, listening to Leo cry. I should have called the police. I should have called Leo's mother, who worked 2 jobs just to pay for his bus pass to get to our prestigious gates. Instead, I opened my ledger. I wrote, "Disciplinary incident, Miller L. aggressive behavior, threat with a weapon, recommended immediate expulsion." Leo looked at me when I stopped writing. He thought I was recording his statement. He thought I was his protector. "It's going to be okay, Leo," I said. That was the first lie. the one that set everything else in motion. I didn't look him in the eye when I said it. I looked at the gold fountain pen in my hand, a gift from the Board of Trustees. I told him to go to the infirmary and wait. Then I picked up the phone and called Marcus Vance. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, professional. "We had a little incident today. Your son was involved in a provocation, but don't worry, I've handled the source of the problem." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear Marcus sipping something, scotch likely, even at 11 in the morning. "Good man, Arthur," he said. "I'll have my lawyers send over the final paperwork for the athletics center this afternoon. We take care of our own, don't we?" I hung up. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the Michigan winter. I looked at the ledger. The ink was still wet. I had just erased a boy to save a building. I thought it would be a one-time thing, a tragic necessity. I told myself that Leo would find another school, that he was young, that he would recover. I told myself that the hundreds of other students who would benefit from the new facilities justified the sacrifice of one. I was 62 when I retired. The school had never looked better. The Thorne Library stands in the center of the campus, a monument to my legacy. But yesterday I took a walk downtown. It was snowing again. I saw a man huddled over a steam grate near the old bus station. He was wearing a threadbare coat, his fingers blue with cold. He was talking to himself, a rhythmic, a high-pitched mumble that felt hauntingly familiar. As I walked past, he looked up. The eyes were older, clouded by years of whatever chemicals he used to numb the world, but the terror was exactly the same. I didn't stop. I kept walking, my expensive leather boots crunching on the fresh snow, the sound echoing like bone snapping in the quiet alley. I felt his eyes on my back, dull, uncomprehending, yet somehow still accusing. I went home to my Tudor-style house, the one I bought with the consulting fees Marcus Vance paid me for years after Julian graduated. I sat in my study, the radiator clicking and hissing, and I reached for the ledger. I opened it to 1994. There was his name, Leo Miller. I had written the word expulsion in such clean, elegant script. I remember thinking at the time that if the handwriting looked professional enough, the lie would eventually become the truth. But the truth had a visitor 3 days after that hearing. Her name was Elena Miller. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She stood in front of my desk, wearing a coat that was too thin for a Michigan January, her hands raw and red from her shift at the commercial laundry. "Mr. Thorne," she had said, her voice trembling but clear, "my son is a good boy. He's never been in trouble. He says they did something terrible to him. He won't even go into the bathroom alone anymore. Please, just look at the locker room cameras." I looked her in the eye and told her the cameras had been malfunctioning due to the cold snap. It was the second lie. The truth, the one I've never told a living soul, not even my wife before she passed, is that I had seen the footage. I had watched it alone in the middle of the night. The grainy black and white images burned into my retinas. I saw Julian and 3 others corner Leo. I saw what they did with the weighted jump ropes. I saw the way Julian laughed while Leo crawled toward the door, reaching for a handle he couldn't grasp. I deleted the file. I didn't just hide it. I wiped it from the server until it was nothing but digital dust. Because Marcus Vance hadn't just offered the school a library, he had offered me a lifeline. My own son, Peter, had been caught in a messy legal situation at his university that same winter. Drugs, a car accident, a girl who wouldn't wake up. Marcus made a phone call. The charges vanished, and the girl's family received a settlement from an anonymous source. I didn't just sell Leo Miller for a gymnasium. I sold him for my own son's freedom. I sat in my study last night looking at that ledger, and then I turned on the television. There was Julian Vance. He's 47 now. He wears $5,000 suits and has that same shark-like smile. He's running for mayor of our city. The screen showed him standing in front of St. Jude's Prep, the very school where I reigned as a king of shadows. I learned about accountability here. Julian told the cameras, gesturing toward the limestone arches. Principal Thorne taught us that there are consequences for our actions. He was a man of iron discipline. He knew that to build a great community, you have to remove the rot before it spreads. He was using his own cruelty and my cowardice as a campaign platform. He was calling Leo the rot. I felt a sudden, violent urge to vomit. I looked down at my hands. They were liver-spotted and thin, the hands of an old man who has lived a long, comfortable life, built on the bones of a 15-year-old boy. The doorbell rang. It was late, nearly 10. I went to the door, expecting a neighbor or perhaps a delivery. Instead, it was Julian. He was alone, standing on my porch, with a bottle of expensive bourbon in a gift bag. He looked exactly like his father had 30 years ago. "Arthur," he said, stepping inside before I could invite him, "I saw you downtown today, near the bus station. Mom, you looked like you'd seen a ghost." He walked into my living room as if he owned it. Maybe he did. "I saw Leo Miller, Julian," I said. My voice sounded small even to me. Julian stopped. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even look surprised. He just sighed, a weary sound, like a man dealing with a senile relative. "He's still around then? Tragic. Some people are just born broken, Arthur. Well, you knew that back then. That's why you did what you did." He poured 2 glasses of bourbon. He handed me one. "I need your endorsement tomorrow," he said. "A formal one, at the gala. We're going to announce the Thorne Scholarship for Civic Leadership. It'll look perfect. The old guard handing the torch to the new." I looked at the amber liquid in the glass. I thought of the man on the steam grate. I thought of the jump ropes in the locker room. "I can't do it, Julian," I whispered. Julian leaned in close. The smell of his expensive cologne was suffocating. "Arthur," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "don't get a conscience now. It's far too late for that. Besides, I still have the files my father kept. I know exactly how much it costs to keep your son out of prison. Don't you think the public would love to know how the great Principal Thorne really operated?" I didn't drink the bourbon. I poured it down the kitchen drain and watched the golden liquid swirl away. a waste of something expensive, just like my life. Julian had left a scent behind, leather and arrogance. It lingered in my hallway, clashing with the smell of old paper and the faint, metallic tang of the radiator. I walked to the phone and called Peter, my son, the reason I broke a boy's spirit 30 years ago. He answered on the third ring. He sounded tired. He's a partner at a firm in Chicago now, a success by every metric that doesn't matter, but he never calls unless I dial first. He hasn't set foot in this house in 5 years. "Dad," he said. His voice was clipped, professional. "It's late." "Julian Vance was here, Peter," I said. My voice felt thin, like old parchment. The silence on the other end was heavy. It was a silence we had cultivated for decades, a thick layer of insulation between us and the truth. Peter knows. He's always known what his freedom cost. He doesn't thank me for it. He carries his clean record like a lead weight, and he hates me for being the one who handed it to him. "He wants an endorsement," I continued. He's threatening to release the whole files about your accident." "Then give it to him," Peter whispered. There was no emotion in his voice, just a profound, hollow exhaustion. "What does it matter now, Dad? We're already ghosts. Just do what he wants and let us stay dead." I hung up without saying goodbye. I went to my study and locked the door. I didn't go to the ledger this time. Instead, I went to the small floor safe, hidden beneath the rug. Inside, tucked away in a velvet-lined box, was a single silver flash drive and a yellowed envelope. I had lied to Elena Miller about the cameras. I hadn't just watched the footage. I had saved it. Every grain of that horrific afternoon in the locker room was preserved on that drive. I told myself I kept it as insurance, but that was another lie. I kept it as a lash, a way to hurt myself when the comfort of my life became too much to bear. And then there was the envelope. It was from Elena, postmarked 6 months after Leo was expelled. I had never opened it. For 30 years, I have carried this sealed piece of paper like a tumor. I knew what it would be, a mother's plea, a curse, a final scream for justice. Elena Miller died 2 weeks after she mailed it. She hit a bridge abutment on a clear night. No skid marks, no mechanical failure. Just a woman who had lost her son's future and finally decided she couldn't carry the weight of his silence anymore. I sat on the floor, the cold of the hard wood seeping into my joints. I looked at the envelope. My fingers shook as I finally, after 3 decades, slid a letter opener under the flap. The paper inside was thin, lined notebook paper. "Mr. Thorne," it began, "I know you saw. I know you know. I don't want money. I don't even want Leo back in that school. I just want you to tell him you believe him. He thinks the world is a place where the truth doesn't exist. He's disappearing, Mr. Thorne. Please, just one word. Tell him he isn't a liar." I didn't cry. I haven't been able to cry since I was a child. I just felt a slow, cold tightening in my chest, as if my heart were being wrapped in wet wire. I had the chance to save him from the void, not with a scholarship, not with a lawyer, but with a single sentence. And I had chosen to let him drown so my own son could keep his seat at the table. The gala was less than 24 hours away. Julian expected me to stand on that stage under the bright lights and tell the city that he was a man of integrity. He expected me to help him climb another rung on the ladder he had built out of Leo Miller's bones. I looked at the flash drive, then I looked at the ledger. I began to realize that Julian wasn't the only one with files. I had been a record keeper for 30 years. I knew where every stone in St. Jude's was buried, and I knew whose names were carved on the underside of the foundation. I spent the night writing, not in the ledger, but a letter of my own. As the sun began to bleed over the Michigan horizon, turning the snow a bruised shade of pink, I dressed in my best tuxedo. I polished my shoes. I looked at the old man in a mirror and felt a deep, pulsing loathing. I drove downtown before the traffic started. I found the bus station. I found the steam grate. The man was still there. He was shivering, his head tucked into his chest. "Leo," I said. He didn't look up at first. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, all the money I had in the house. I set it on a grate beside him. He didn't touch it. "I believe you," I whispered. He looked up then. His eyes were bloodshot, dancing with a frantic, broken energy. He didn't recognize me, not as the principal, not as the man who had signed his life away. He just saw a man in a tuxedo standing in the snow. "It's too cold for a party," Leo said. His voice was a raspy ghost of the boy I had known. "You're right," I said. "It's much too cold." I left him there with the money and drove toward the grand ballroom. I had the flash drive in my pocket. I had the ledger in the passenger seat. I thought I was ready to burn it all down. I thought I was ready to finally be the man Elena Miller asked me to be. But I had underestimated how deep the rot truly went. I had forgotten that in a world built on lies, the truth isn't a weapon, it's a suicide note. The grand ballroom of the Lansing Hotel was a sea of crystal and hypocrisy. I stood backstage, my hand clutching the leather ledger until my knuckles were white. The flash drive was a cold, hard lump in my trouser pocket. I could hear the muffled roar of the crowd, the clinking of champagne flutes, the orchestrated laughter of people who trade in favors and silence. Julian found me in the green room. He looked magnificent in his tuxedo, his teeth gleaming under the vanity lights. He didn't look like a bully. He looked like a savior. "5 minutes, Arthur," he said, checking his watch. "The teleprompter has your speech. Just stick to the script. Mention the Thorne Library. Mention the legacy of excellence. Keep it clean." I looked at him, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt a strange, hollow clarity. "I'm not using the script, Julian," I said. Julian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a single photograph. He didn't hand it to me, he just held it up. It wasn't a photo of my son's car accident. It was a still frame from the locker room footage, the grainy black and white night vision I thought I had deleted. It showed Leo on the floor. It showed Julian and the others. But it showed something else, something I had scrubbed from my own memory. was the frantic desperation of a man trying to save his soul. In the corner of the frame, holding the heavy gym door shut so Leo couldn't escape, was Peter. My son wasn't just the beneficiary of Marcus Vance's settlement. He was an accomplice. "You didn't see him, did you, Arthur?" Julian whispered, his voice dripping with a cruel, intimate satisfaction. "You were so busy looking at me, so busy protecting your good boy, that you didn't realize he was right there with us. He enjoyed it just as much as I did." The room seemed to tilt. The air felt thin, metallic. "That's why the accident at university was covered up so easily," Julian continued, leaning in until I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "It wasn't a favor for you. It was a favor for a brother in arms. Well, if you go out there and tell the truth, you don't just destroy me. You send Peter to prison. You destroy the partner at the firm. You destroy the life you sold your soul to buy." I looked at the ledger in my hand. It felt like a tombstone. I realized then that my moral struggle for the last 30 years had been a fantasy. I wasn't a man caught between a hard choice and a right one. I was a man who had already been hollowed out, a puppet whose strings had been cut a long time ago. The stage manager signaled, "You're on, Mr. Thorne." I walked out into the light. The applause was deafening. It washed over me like a tide of cold salt water. I reached the podium and looked out at the sea of blurred faces. I saw Julian in the front row, his arms crossed, a look of calm expectation on his face. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the flash drive, the truth that would set Leo Miller free, the truth that would end Julian's career, the truth that would put my son behind bars. I looked at the teleprompter. "Good evening," I said. My voice was a dead thing, echoing through the speakers. "I have spent my life at St. Jude's Prep believing in one thing, the power of legacy." I spoke for 10 minutes. I praised Julian Vance's character. I spoke of his unwavering commitment to discipline. I told the city that he was the only man fit to lead them into the future. Every word was a nail. Every sentence was a shovel of dirt on a 15-year-old boy who was, at that very moment, probably shivering on a steam grate 3 miles away. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted for 3 minutes. Julian came up and hugged me. It was a performance of a brotherhood that would be played on the local news for weeks. I drove home in total silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't even turn on the heater. I went to my study and sat in the dark. I didn't open the ledger. I didn't need to. I knew the final entry. "I am 65 years old. I have a beautiful house, a successful son, and a library named after me. And I am the most apathetic monster I have ever known." I took the flash drive and the ledger out to the garden. I put them in the small iron fire pit I use for autumn leaves. I struck a match. The paper caught quickly. The plastic of the drive melted into a foul-smelling black sludge. I watched the smoke rise into the Michigan night, disappearing into the cold, indifferent stars. There is no justice. There is only the price we are willing to pay to keep the lights on and the doors locked. I went back inside and made a cup of tea. It was hot and bitter. I sat by the window and waited for the morning, knowing that when the sun came up, I would still be exactly who I am. A man who chose a library over a life.